I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in a probably termed a lower middle class family, although my family did own a house, and that was important. Both my mom and dad worked, and middle of my school years, 4th and 5th grade, we moved to Idaho for a year and a half. I remember my mom getting her nurse's license and going to work as a nurse, and that was a huge accomplishment for her. My parents live in the American dream, from the standpoint of not from what they gained from it, but from what they gave to us kids. My childhood was fairly happy. They protected us from a lot of garbage and a lot of bad stuff. They had financial issues here and there, but they didn't let us in on that for the most part. And that's what the American dream is to give your kids something better than you had. And they did a good job of doing that for us. The one hallmark thing that I would say that my dad did for me is that he took fatherlessness out of my family. He didn't have a father that was in the home, but he took fatherlessness out of the family and gave me a better life with no baggage like that. My dad went to Multnomah School of the Bible, it's now Multnomah University, to do biblical studies, and he became a pastor for a short period of time. Thought maybe that was his calling. And he discovered the same thing I probably would discover, that pastors needed to counsel their flock, their people, and he didn't have much patience for counseling. He would help people figure out what they were supposed to do and give them a plan, and they'd come back 2 weeks later and having done nothing. And eventually he just started telling people, well, if you're not going to do anything, I can't help you. Well, apparently that's not very pastoral to say that to people. And of course he didn't say it just like that to everybody, but that didn't last too awful long, a little over a year and a half. But it was a really great time for our family. We lived out in the middle of nowhere, a river in our backyard, and we fished and we hunted and hiked. Whenever we afternoons after school, we'd go for a hike up in the mountains, and that was just what happened in this area. My parents didn't keep track of us really, as long as we came back, which we did. There was nowhere else to go, so we came back. My father did something that a good father would do, in that he saw a problem in his own life and he went to solve that problem. He knew he wanted to get married and have some kids, and that was all great, but he was fatherless for most of his life. His father lived quite a while, but never was around, or rarely was around. And so he'd had basically a fatherless existence. His mother had died. He was raised by his grandmother, and he knew what he needed to do was take away that issue of fatherlessness, the cycle of it, for his kids. There's a lot of things my dad didn't do right and didn't do too well, because he didn't have a great example, and because we all have faults. But that's what he did well. What that did for me and my sisters is it created this possibility mindset. We didn't have that standing in the way. We could dream about what would we want. If we could do anything, what would we do? If we could have anything, what would we have? And it gave us the ability to think that way. And so by the time I got married, I wanted to get married and have some kids too. And a couple of months after I got married, I realized that minimum wage job that I had when I got married wasn't going to really sustain us and do for us what we wanted as a married couple. So I quit my job and started basically knocking on doors and finding things to do, which was at 4, 5, and sometimes even more multiples more than minimum wage. And he gave me the mindset that said, yeah, you can do that. Of course you can do that. So I applaud my father, not for what he did wrong, of course, but for what he did well, which was he broke cycles in our life, and he was faithful to my mother, committed to her, cared for her, loved her, and showed that affection throughout his whole life, and was a great example to me of that. So I never had to worry about not knowing what it looks like. My father was good in that, very good in that way.